The power of oxytocin. Oxytocin has been coined the love hormone for good reason. You know those warm and fuzzy feelings you get when you cuddle a puppy, hug your friend, or kiss your partner. That's oxytocin at work. Oxytocin has been in the headlines, gaining a reputation for making people more social, trusting, generous, and loving. It's a neuropeptide, meaning that it's a protein-like molecule your brain cells use to communicate with each other. Oxytocin is also a hormone, meaning that the brain releases it into the bloodstream to communicate with the body. For a little brain chemical, oxytocin has some big jobs. It plays a role in sex, childbirth, bonding, social interaction, emotions, and many other functions important to us mammals. Our brains produce it naturally, but there's also synthetic oxytocin that is sometimes used therapeutically. Regardless of how you get a dose, oxytocin seems to not only nudge us towards more pro-social behavior, but it can also affect our memory and thinking. Let's look at some ways that this complicated brain chemical affects the way we feel and act, and how we can coax the brain to release more of it for those feel-good feelings. Oxytocin probably helps people to bond through openness, trust, and generosity. Oxytocin got its glowing reputation from the evidence that it seems to help us be more open and connected with others. For example, one fascinating study found that when male college students got a dose of oxytocin from a nasal spray, they were more willing to share their emotions about a painful memory with a stranger than participants who got a placebo spray. Not only did a dose of oxytocin make individuals trust strangers more with their emotions, but with their cold, hard cash too. A separate study had participants play an investment game where they could entrust any amount of their money tokens to another participant, a custodian. Those who sniffed an oxytocin spray were much more likely to let this agent hang on to their tokens. Most of this group handed over most or all of the money. In contrast, those who only got a placebo spray were less willing to trust a stranger. Only 1/5 of them handed over all of their tokens. But what about straight up handing over your hard-earned money to a stranger in need? Oxytocin might make a person more benevolent too. Another study found that when people got an oxytocin nasal spray, they shared 80% more money with a total stranger than people who did not get the spray. So should we all add taking a dose of oxytocin to our morning routines? If all the traders on Wall Street got a sniff with their morning coffees, would the trading floor be less cutthroat? Not so fast. There have also been studies that failed to find the same results, and none of these sensational studies can tell us about oxytocin's effects in daily life or in the long term. Plus, we should always be careful about study findings that seem too good to be true. I would say that things are looking promisingly warm and fuzzy for oxytocin, but the science is not rock solid enough yet that we start carrying oxytocin sprays in our purses and backpacks. It's possible that oxytocin can actually impair memory. A study published around the same time as the Trust study found that when people got a dose of oxytocin spray, they performed worse on a word recall test than people who got a placebo spray. Does that mean oxytocin makes us more forgetful? Interestingly, this might depend on your attachment style. This refers to your pattern of bonding with other people, including the way you deal with trust, autonomy, and intimacy. A recent study found that if your attachment style is more emotionally independent, that is, you find depending on others uncomfortable, oxytocin actually improves your ability to learn and recall a list of words. But oxytocin had a detrimental effect on the memories of those who were more willing to rely on others. Still, these two studies were only looking at short-term learning and recall. What about in the long run? Oxytocin redeems itself here. It's no surprise that too much stress is harmful to the hippocampus, a brain area indispensable to memory formation. This is true for us and for rats. But if a stressed-out rat got an oxytocin spray, it seemed to protect the brain cells in their hippocampus, which helps their memory health in the long run. Oxytocin provides pain relief. Continuing the list of all the positive things oxytocin can do, it may be helpful for physical pain relief as well. First, it's interesting to know that people with chronic pain, like those with fibromyalgia, naturally have lower levels of oxytocin circulating in their blood. The lower their oxytocin level, the higher they rate their pain, stress, and depression. Even healthy people with lower blood levels of oxytocin had lower pain tolerance. Scientists became curious about whether providing people with oxytocin would decrease their pain levels or pain sensitivity. It did, specifically for those with chronic migraine, irritable bowel syndrome, chronic back pain, and even cancer pain. For people without pain disorders, oxytocin made them better able to tolerate acute pain. Even more incredible is that oxytocin potentially not only works directly on the brain's pain processing areas, but also indirectly decreases suffering by relieving depression and anxiety related to pain. Since oxytocin has many different effects on the central nervous system, working through both physiological and psychological channels, it may be able to ease the vicious spiral that people fall into when their pain makes them feel hopeless and anxious, which in turn worsens the pain. How can you naturally get more oxytocin in your life? Even though oxytocin is complicated and the flashy headlines about its power should be taken with a grain of salt, it's still safe to say it's a generally useful chemical for our well-being and joy. While oxytocin sprays claiming all kinds of magical benefits are sold online, be wary, the research really hasn't tested how and whether they work. There is also no regulation of these sprays. But worry not, we can get doses of oxytocin in natural ways. Here are some things you can do to get more into your bloodstream. Hug and cuddle. Comforting physical touch is a sure way to fire up the oxytocin between parents and children, between couples, and of course, between humans and dogs. So get to snuggling, have sex, or love yourself. Sexual pleasure is one of the most efficient ways to get a big shot of oxytocin. Whether you're with a partner or helping yourself, oxytocin can skyrocket with orgasm. Watch an emotional movie. When we feel compassion towards others, we're putting ourselves emotionally in their shoes. A research study showed that inducing empathy by watching emotional video clips raised people's oxytocin levels, which in turn led them to be more generous. Might I recommend the first 5 minutes of Up for a potent boost? Give birth and breastfeed. Obviously this is not an option for everyone, but if you happen to be planning on giving birth in the future, you get to look forward to the rush of oxytocin that you'll get in the process. This huge oxytocin release does everything from causing uterine contractions, which starts the process of birthing the baby, to getting the body ready for breastfeeding. The oxytocin will also help you bond with your baby and generally give you that warm, glowing feeling that new moms are famous for. The love molecule, oxytocin, is the chemical foundation for trusting others. Activated by positive social interactions, it makes us care about others in tangible ways, and it motivates us to work together for a common purpose. After a dozen years studying the role oxytocin plays in human behavior, I thought I'd share an answer to the question I am most often asked: how can I raise my levels? Below is my top 10 list. But first, a short neuroscience digression. The effect of oxytocin, like other signaling chemicals in the brain, is more dependent on changes than on absolute levels. Oxytocin helps us respond appropriately to our social environment by changing its amounts in the brain second by second. Rather than focus on oxytocin levels that are near zero, for most people without a positive social interaction, the better question is how can one increase their level of oxytocin when interacting with others and thereby increase empathy and compassion towards them. Another neuroscience digression, because oxytocin is so ancient, a precursor can be traced back at least 400 million years to fish. Natural selection has found ways to utilize it in both the brain and the body. Unlike almost every other neurochemical we make, animal studies have shown that the change in oxytocin after a social interaction as measured in the blood reflects changes in oxytocin in the brain. Thus, If an activity causes a spike in oxytocin as measured in the blood, a corresponding spike is likely occurring in the brain. It is brain oxytocin that is most responsible for effects on behavior, and blood oxytocin gives us a window into what occurs in the brain. The ways to raise oxytocin are based on measuring changes in oxytocin in blood in humans. Many are from my lab and some come from other sources. Instead, I'm simply listing the ways to raise oxytocin in order of my personal favorites. Listen with your eyes. Instead of being glued to an electronic device, give the person with you your complete attention. Watch their face and listen to what he or she is telling you. Give a gift. Our first human oxytocin study showed that receiving gifts raised oxytocin. Why not make this a regular practice? The key is not to expect a gift in return, just surprise someone for no reason. Share a meal. Eating moderately is calming and helps us bond with others. Including a glass of wine is fine too. You can increase the effect by following number 9 and making the meal you share a gift. Meditate while focusing on others. My lab has found that a form of meditation called metta, in which one focuses on loving others, is better at fostering social connections than standard mindfulness meditation. Soak in a hot tub. I love to do this with my kids. The warm temperature and time together offer the ability to connect with them. And we all look goofy when we're wet, making the time even more fun. Use social media. Okay, you are doing this anyway, but you should know that 100% of the people I tested using social media had an increase in oxytocin. Just don't forget to see your Facebook friends in person too. Ride a roller coaster or jump out of an airplane. Many activities that are moderately stressful and done with one or more other people raise oxytocin. My recent tandem skydive produced a greater than 200% oxytocin spike. Try being a single rider on a roller coaster and you'll experience an immediate bond with the person next to you. Pet a dog. This doesn't always work unless the dog belongs to you, but if you identify as a dog person, any old dog will raise your oxytocin. The dog won't complain either. And once your oxytocin is up, you'll connect better to the humans around you too. Use the love word. Tell those around you that you love them. Oxytocin is the love molecule, so it is part of our evolved biology to love others, both philia and eros. You've got to put it out there to get it back. With friends too, and maybe even at work. 8 hugs a day. We have shown that touch not only raises oxytocin, but it reduces cardiovascular stress and can improve the immune system too. Try telling people that you hug rather than shake hands and see what happens when you give others the gift of oxytocin. Studies showed that the more one releases oxytocin, the easier it becomes to do so. That has certainly been my experience in practicing these oxytocin-releasing activities. If you can do all 10, you'll be an oxytocin master. Thanks for watching. For more help, touch the links below. Feel free to subscribe for further assistance.